shadows was the big hand on the clock as it crept towards the hour of 8. Saren stared up at it, hypnotized and weary. How could it go so slowly? Had she really only been waiting half an hour? It seemed like forever. She was muffled in a heavy coat, a woolen hat, scarves, and a shawl. But she had never been colder in all her life. Even with thick gloves thrust deep in her pockets, she couldn't feel her fingers. Her toes were numb. In fact, if she didn't move right now, she would probably freeze to the spot. So she jumped to her feet and began to stamp up and down the bare platform, the thump of her clumsy boots ringing in the bitter night. She stamped 14 steps to the wall, 14 steps back, to the wall and back. Over everything, the benches and the rooftops and the railway posters. A thin layer of frost shimmered like crushed diamonds in the night from the lamp. The night was so silent it scared her. She breathed out a cold air cloud and then turned quickly as the station master's door opened. A big man in uniform came out and stared at her. "Are you on your own, miss?" It was a stupid question and it annoyed her. There were a lot of cross answers she could have snapped out, but she swallowed them and just said, "Yes." "Waiting for the 8:40, are you? Is there any other?" "Well, no, not at this time of night." He was a red-faced man and he wore a peaked cap that looked as if it had been sat on more than once. He stared down at her as if she puzzled him. Finally he said, "It's a rare cold night. You could go in the waiting room, but it's first class. Are you first class?" She knew she wasn't. No one ever spent that sort of money on her, but she pulled out her ticket and looked at it. "Third," it said in large letters. She put it back in her pocket before he could see it, drew herself up and said, "Yes, that's right. First class. Show me the waiting room, please." For a moment she thought he didn't believe her. Maybe he didn't, but he smiled, picked up her suitcase and set off along the platform. The case looked tiny. Even though it had felt so heavy, even though she had found it so heavy. She hurried after him to a door with first class waiting room written on the frosted glass. He opened it and said, "Here we go. This'll be a bit cozier. You'll be like toast in here till the train comes." She pushed past him into a warmth that was so wonderful she wanted to shout with sheer relief. The room was small. There was a bench against the wall, a big table with an oil lamp on it, and best of all, a fire in the grate, a pile of coals, glowing scarlet under a coat of ashes. She went across and huddled over it. "You're fair frozen." The station master stepped back and looked at her curiously. "I've not seen you round here before. Travelled a long way, have you?" "I used to live in India." "Blimey, I expect it was hotter there." Despite herself, she allowed a tiny smile. "A bit. Couldn't stand that myself, all them flies and mosquitoes and tigers. Now, you sit down and make yourself comfortable. No one will disturb you." inched closer to the coals and sat on it, tucking her feet up and pulling her coat and shawl tighter around her. This was so much better. Warmth began to thaw out her nose and ears and fingers. It was painful, but worth it, she hummed, wishing she could go to sleep. But she had to be careful not to miss the train. The fire crackled and she watched it. Of course, what she had told him about India was true. She had lived there once, but only as a tiny baby. She couldn't remember anything about it at all, really, except the sort of vagueness of heat and the fierce blue glare of the sky. Excuse me. And someone leaning over her and kissing her. She shrugged it away. Her parents had both died out there, and she had been brought home on the ship and had lived there for 12 years, at the orphanage of St. Mary's. Even now, she couldn't believe she was out of that place. Great Aunt Grace had found her and taken her away, but only for 6 months, because now Aunt Grace was dead too. The old woman had been bedridden, living in lonely splendour at the top of a dull, old house near London, and Saren had hardly seen her. She had stayed in the kitchen mostly with Martha the maid and the white cat, Samuel. He was already missing them. She was already missing them. Maybe there would be a cat at Plassy Fran. In her pocket the letter crackled. She took it out and moved nearer the lamp to read it again. Dear Saren, here is your railway ticket. As I told you at your aunt's funeral, your father's oldest friend, Captain Arthur Jones, has offered to take you in. Captain Jones is your godfather, sorry. It seems strange that you have never met him. He has a wife, Lady Mare, and a son called Thomas, and his house is in Wales. It's a grand old place called Plassy Fran. The train will take you to Treffel, the nearest station, where I'm sure someone will come meet you. I hope you will be happy living there. Yours most sincerely, J.R. Freeman, Solicitor at Law, Staple Inn, London. Saren crumpled it up thoroughly. A grand house. She hugged her knees and dreamed. There would certainly be a hot bath and a huge bedroom with curtains round the bed. There would be maids and footmen and glittering chandeliers and delicious cakes. New clothes for sure, and Captain Jones would be a tall, handsome man with a moustache, and Lady Mare would be pretty, and they would be waiting anxiously on the doorstep to meet her. And there was a boy in the house, Master Thomas. She imagined him with dark hair and a clever, cheerful face, holding out his hand and saying, "Hello, Saren. It's so great you're here." It seemed too good to be true, but maybe it was. Maybe. Oops. Maybe this Thomas was some spoiled little brat who would resent her coming, and they would argue, and he would pull her hair. Well, let him try. She yawned again. The fire crackled, so quiet and warm that she closed her eyes. For a moment everything was so peaceful. Then somebody coughed. It was a soft sound, the very smallest sound, but it made her snap her eyes open in alarm. She stared across the table and sat bolt upright in shock. There was a man in the room. He was leaning back in the shadowy corner of the bench opposite, right back in the dark. so she could barely see him. A very tall, thin man with clothes as black as midnight. He wore a hat that hid his eyes, though she knew he was looking at her. On his lap was a large parcel wrapped in newspaper and tied with string. He held it tight with both hands. His fingers were long and spindly, and on one was a ring, its stone a green glimmer of emerald. Seren sat frozen in complete shock. Where on earth had he come from? He couldn't have been there all the time. The room had been empty. The door had never opened, and even if she'd fallen asleep, it could have only been for a second. "Hello," the man said quietly. "Hello," she said to be polite. She looked down and saw her fingers were twisted together. She uncurled her legs and sat up straight. What was there to be scared of? It was a waiting room. Anyone could come in and wait. But still, she didn't like it. A coal slid in the fire. The man's voice was not much more than a whisper. "Are you waiting for a train?" "Yes." He sat upright. He seemed very restless. "So am I. Maybe it's the same one, but it's late. I'm sure it's late." After all, he wasn't very frightening. She had never seen anyone so thin or so anxious. "It's not due yet," she said. He glanced over quickly at the door, and she saw his eyes dark and wary, lit by a slant of lamplight from outside. "Did you hear that?" She stared at him. "Hear what?" "That. Listen." She listened. She heard the wind, the tick of the clock, and maybe a distant drift of sound, like a far-off cry. The effect on the man was astonishing. He jumped up in panic. "It's them! I'm sure it's them! Do you think we can lock the door?" He hurried over to it, but there was no key, so he opened a slit and peered out. "I can't see anything, it's so dark." He came back too agitated to sit. He paced up and down. Such a tall man. Seren watched him, fascinated. His hands clutching the parcel were long and fine, like the hands of a parcel in her hands. It was heavy and as big as a loaf of bread. For a moment she thought something inside it croaked. It startled her so much she dropped it quickly onto the table and sat down. But her peace was shattered and she felt scared and edgy. The clock ticked time away. 1 minute, 2, 5, 10. It didn't come back. She stood up and hurried to the door and opened it and peered out. "Hello," she said. "Are you there?" But the station was silent and icy. By 8:40 he still hadn't returned. Saren stood by the table, staring at the paper parcel. What if her train came? At once, as if she had summoned it, a shrill whistle split the night. What should she do? Leave the parcel here, where anyone might steal it? Call the station master? Yes, that would be best. She grabbed her suitcase and hauled it towards the door. The train was already rumbling in from the darkness and settling to a long hissing stop. Its carriages and engine clicking and sparking with heat. Brakes screeched. Steam erupted in billowy clouds. The air was sharp with the stink of oil and coal. Doors swung open. Passengers climbed down. All at once. The station was full of people chattering, calling out, unloading bags. She looked hurriedly for the station master, but he was far down at the end with his back to her, supervising great milk churns being loaded on. "Excuse me," she shouted. "Hey, hello." He couldn't hear her. She looked around. The thin stranger was still nowhere to be seen. But it wasn't her business, was it? Any of this? She just had to get on the train. So she tugged one of the carriage doors open and climbed up, dragging her heavy suitcase inside and dumping it with relief on the faded red seat. Then she leaned out of the door, hanging on tight. Across the platform was the waiting room, softly lamplit. She could see the newspaper parcel lying abandoned and unprotected on the table. She waved madly. "Hey, can you hear me?" Far off, the station master blew his whistle. He waved back and raised a green flag. Sorry. "Whatever happens, don't leave it here alone," the stranger had said. More than said, begged, as if whatever was in there was so precious. She had to do something. In an instant, she jumped down, raced across the platform, dived into the waiting room, snapped the parcel and ran out with it. The train was already moving. She ran alongside it and grabbed the rail. Somebody shouted in alarm. For a terrifying moment, she knew she was being whisked off her feet. Then she scrambled up the step and flung herself inside. The heavy door slamming, and the whistle gave a great screech as she fell on the dirty floor with the parcel under her. Sparks flew past the window. The station was already half a mile behind. The train roared away into the night. Well, that's the end of chapter 1. So, thank you very much for watching. In my next video, I will be reading chapter 2 of the book. So, if you want to hear more, then please tune in for that one. Thank you for watching me, and